Hi, my name is Joe Pavelka, and I'm a professor at Mount Royal University, and I run the Italy Slow Culture Field School. It ran in 2024 and again in 2025, and we are going to run it again in May of 2026. And there's a couple things that I want you to know about it. This field school is 6 credits, 2 full courses, 6 credits. It runs the entire month of May 2026, and we are going to be in Tuscany, Florence, and Siena, and then Sardinia. And I do have to say that Sardinia is one of the 5 blue zones in the world. And then we're going to close off with a few days in Rome. Now, I can tell you more about this field school, but I think what would help is for you to get a student perspective on this. And for this, I'm going to hand it over to a student that was on our field school. Caden.
Hi, my name is Caden Groves, and I'm here to host a short video about the MRU Field School process and the experiences and lessons that my group learned on the Italy 2025 Field School. So the first emotion that I felt after learning I would be attending a field school was fear. I recognize that may not be what a future field school attendee wants to hear, but please let me finish, which you have to because this is a pre-recorded video. It was a fear that we are all familiar with, a nervous fear of the unknown. I had launched myself right out of my comfort zone, something I do very rarely, and into something that I had never ever thought I would ever experience in my life, and it scared me. Once that fear died down a little, though, the emotions that came next weren't nearly as terrifying. I realized in a moment that I had an opportunity of a lifetime ahead of me, and I would have to make the most of it if I wanted to enjoy it. I was excited to explore a new country, a new continent for me, and a new people. Both the people of the country I was about to visit and the people that were also attending the field school, who were mostly just as nervous as I was. As such, this made our pre-departure meetings awkward at times, but after we all got on that plane and all our worries were diffused and in the same recycled cabin air, we realized that there was no going back now. And therefore, we all immediately had something in common, in that we were learning together. And soon, all our worries slowly drifted away and were replaced by happy new memories brought on by new experiences. Experiences that we never would have had if we never made room in our anxious heads for them. Once again, I'd like to mention that my class was the Italy Field School in 2025. Including our professor, Joe Pavelka, whose lovely mug you saw at the beginning of this video, we were a class of 20, and we were gone for a full month of 4 weeks. Our journey started in Florence, Italy. Well, technically, we landed in Rome, but we immediately hopped on a train to Florence and exited at Santa Maria Novella station 2 hours later. Our exhausted and somewhat jet-lagged eyes were immediately greeted by the view of the Santa Maria Cathedral, and soon after, we were left to our own devices, with only one instruction: go find your homestay. The following days were, unsurprisingly, spent by many frantically exploring this new city, wishing to see as much as we could as soon as we could. But also during this first week was one of the most important experiences of the trip, wherein we stayed with local families or local individuals in their homes. Every morning, we would be greeted by our homestay parents' choice of breakfast, always authentically Italian, such as a spread of sweet pastries and a coffee darker than the rain-soaked cobblestone that often lined Florence's side streets. Well, every evening, we would return from a long day of exploring, attending Italian language classes, and working on our field assignments, to an equally as authentic Italian dinner, almost always cooked by our homestay parents themselves. And what followed was a regular Italian evening. Some houses watched soccer or football, while others went on a late-night stroll. But let me tell you, nobody was allowed to leave until the dinner pot was empty and licked clean. As such, our evenings often ended up as simply talking around the dinner table for hours and hours as our brains started to overheat, trying to communicate in Italian with our lovely hosts. Our homestay accommodations, combined with Italian language classes and the general excitement of exploring a new city, made our first week in Florence feel very welcoming, a feeling that would continue in our second week as we moved out of our homestays and into a local hostel, the Ostello Bello. By this time, we had spent a large majority of our energy trying to learn about Florence, but not so much about our other classmates. Outside of our homestay groups, some were maintaining a safe distance, but as the second week rolled around and we found ourselves staying in a community within a community, we opened up more. We went on larger group excursions, attended some events held by the hostel, took a cooking class, hosted a potluck, and some of us decided to go on a day trip to Pisa. And it's here that I want to talk about the aspect of freedom that some of you guys may be curious about. It's true that this was a university-held event, but the freedom to do what you want was still there. As long as you operate within the boundaries of the field school and the words of your professor, you will maintain a sense of freedom, just like we did, that some may assume is lost on a trip like this. My experiences in Florence, all distinctly new and unique, had cultivated a weird sense of familiarity in me, and I found myself somewhat sad that we were leaving. Joe mentioned at the beginning of this video that our topic for this field school was slow culture, slow living. This manifested itself in many ways, but came through most clearly via our itinerary. The idea was to slowly introduce the class to the Italian culture of slow living by moving through stages. And Florence was the first, a large, bustling city crowded with tourists, but after taking a second to listen to what the thousands of murmurs in the crowd are saying, one finds that under the surface, those that live in Florence go about their day in a stark contrast to the loud and busy streets they walk every day. Turn off Ponte Vecchio and find numerous little shops, open from 10 to 3 and run by individual business owners who simply wake up, go about their day with a smile on their face, and return home to relax and enjoy themselves. No angry businessmen taking calls on the street while sipping a currently spilling coffee to go, and no frantic lunch breaks spent inhaling pre-packaged sandwiches. Just the gentle rhythm of life, hidden beneath the crashing waves of tourists and honking taxis. Uncovering the buried true nature of Florence was our first example of slow culture, but at our next destination, it would be far more obvious. This is Siena. Not exactly small, but also not on most travelers' itinerary. It's somewhat out of the way of the big sights of Rome, Venice, and Florence. Siena is an old, distinctly Italian city that has retained its identity and charm while also having avoided being completely trampled by tourists. As such, the slow lifestyle that this trip sought to witness was on full display almost always. Not just in the city, where despite the narrow medieval streets, walking around never felt cramped, but also in our excursions outside the city, meant to exemplify slow life in the countryside. These excursions included a bike ride in the Tuscan countryside where we rode gently along the dirt roads that line the circumference of local vineyards, and included a stop at a local castle, owned since 1141 by the Ricasoli family, who used the property to oversee numerous vineyards of their own, and is also home to a local legend that claims that the ghost of the first owner, Bettino Ricasoli, still roams the halls. Also during our first week in Siena were numerous wine tastings and vineyard tours, one of which, San Giorgio Alapi, is family run to this day, and fed us a series of local dinners, paired with their own selection of wine made from the variety of grapes in the vineyard we toured only moments ago. Despite Siena's evident display of slow culture, vibrancy still exists within its ancient walls. On our final day in the city, the Italian equivalent of the Tour de France, the Giro d'Italia, rode directly through the city streets, and the lap came to an end only meters away from where we were staying. This sudden burst of energy would continue through the next day as we prepared for a day of heavy travel and hopped on an overnight ferry from the port of Civitavecchia as we stared at the crashing waves of the Mediterranean in anticipation of what would be our final week on the Italian island of Sardinia. A half-hour drive from the nearest small town, Filiguerta camping village is not what would first come to mind when one thinks of an Italian beach resort. Nestled deep in between the sweeping mountains and rocky coast of Sardinia, we slept in a trailer with a stove, which was used every night, supplied by local ingredients from the small resort store, to cook our own meals. If Florence and Siena demonstrated slow culture, then it was Sardinia that demonstrated slow living. Besides what remained of our assignments, including a business consultation for the owner of the resort, our days were nothing. and we all lived at a pace that we were very, very not used to. A pace that would be very difficult to attain meaningfully in Canada unless you really search for it. And it was a pace that everybody else at the resort also abided by. A very, very slow pace. We filled our days of nothingness with 2 to 3 hour long breakfast chats on the porch, sitting quietly by the pool with our laptops and assignment partners, playing games of tennis, attending some Latin dance classes, and staring quaintly at the mesmerizing come and go of the tides on the beach. Many of our evenings were once again spent on our trailer porches, talking quietly, bathed only in the light from inside and the shimmer inside our bottles of wine. There was one evening that we did get out, though, to a place us students only knew as Tonino's house. This event had been talked up by Joe even before the trip started as the ultimate demonstration of everything this class had aimed to teach, the result of slow culture, slow living. We arrived at the property after a long bus ride through the countryside to a sprawling estate in the middle of nowhere that was, in all sense of the word, self-sufficient. We spent the day touring the property's numerous vegetable and fruit gardens, ranches that held horses, goats, chicken, ducks, and boars, a vineyard, and an outdoor roasting spit, with an output we ate that same night in the property's own restaurant, along with a great variety of other Sardinian and Italian dishes and wine, all of which were prepared with ingredients found on the property, including the wild boar, whose meat-stuffed delicious handmade raviolis topped with a tomato sauce created from their farm's own tomatoes. A couple more slow days would pass until our departure date, where we hopped back on the ferry with our final destination in mind, which was, of course, Rome. These final days in Rome came to encapsulate everything that this trip had been attempting to teach us. That slow living is not about doing less, it's about doing things with more intention. It's about foregoing the thought process that the destination is more important than the journey. It's about being content to do what we can and being alright with what we can't. Rome, much like Florence, is a bustling city with an energy that rarely quiets down. But unlike Florence, we did not spend our first days in Rome frantically running around the city in an attempt to see everything. As a result of our experiences, we had learned to appreciate both the journey and the destination. Our time in Rome reflected that shift. It was largely spent wandering the eternal city at a relaxed pace, eager to discover what we could and at peace with whatever we might miss. On our final night, the class gathered together on the rooftop of our hostel. The sun was setting behind St. Peter's Basilica in the distance, casting a warm golden hue over the city, and the final evening that followed was uncharacteristically calm. It was not a party. There was no loud music or celebratory dancing, only some quaint evening conversation and reflection, combined only with spilled drops of wine and some tears. We reflected on everything we had seen and learned, the friendships we had made, the fears we had overcome, and the countless moments that shaped the experience into something none of us could have really anticipated. So, if you're thinking about attending a field school, then yeah, it will make you nervous, and yeah, it will push you out of your comfort zone. But if you give yourself a chance to change, you just might. Because if my field school taught me anything, it's not about where you go. It's about who you are when you leave and who you become when you return. So thank you, MRU Field Schools, for the opportunity you gave me, and thank you to Florence, Siena, Sardinia, and Rome, and everywhere else that I was lucky enough to learn something from.